On a clear, cloudless morning in the spring of 1876, meat fell from the sky over a Kentucky farm. Not rain, not hail. Meat, soft, red, and still warm, tumbling out of an empty sky for nearly 2 full minutes, coating fences, trees, and fields in raw flesh. The family's animals ate it eagerly. 2 neighbors tasted it themselves, and within a week it was front-page news across the country. What kind of animal did it come from? Where did it come from? And a century and a half later, with modern science at our disposal, why do we still not know? This is the story of the Kentucky meat shower. In the 1870s, Olympian Springs was a small resort community tucked into the hills of Bath County in northeastern Kentucky. It was the kind of place built around a spring-water hotel, surrounded by quiet farmland and split-rail fences, the sort of small American settlement where nothing of national importance ever seemed to happen. On the Crouch family farm, Friday, March 3rd began like any other. Mrs. Rebecca Crouch was outside making soap, a slow, ordinary chore, the kind repeated on farms across the country every week. Her young grandson was there with her, likely bored, likely restless, the way children are during chores that take all morning. The sky above them was by every account perfectly clear. No clouds, no wind to speak of, nothing to suggest that anything unusual was coming. It's worth pausing here, because this detail matters more than it might seem. Almost every strange event in history begins with a storm, a shadow, some warning the world gives before it turns strange. This one didn't. The sky gave no warning at all. And then, sometime before noon, something began to fall. Mrs. Crouch's grandson looked up first. "Why, Grandma?" he said, "it's snowing." But it wasn't snow. What was falling from that empty sky were chunks of raw, gristly flesh, some no bigger than a coin, others as large as a man's hand. They struck the ground with a wet, snapping sound. Within minutes, the yard, the fences, and the surrounding briar patches were covered in it, red and glistening in the March sun. For one terrible moment, Mrs. Crouch feared the unthinkable, that her husband and son, who were away from the farm that morning, had somehow been killed, and what she was watching fall from the sky was them. It was an irrational fear, born entirely of panic. But imagine standing in that yard, meat raining down around you, with absolutely no explanation for where it could possibly be coming from. What would you have thought? By the time the shower ended, and it lasted only a few minutes, it had covered nearly an entire acre of the property. Mrs. Crouch guessed later at least half a bushel of meat had come down. When her husband returned and surveyed the scene, some accounts suggest there was enough to fill a wagon. And then came a detail that unsettled the neighbors more than almost anything else. The family's hogs, chickens, cat, and dog were already eating it, and by every account, enjoying it. Words spread through Olympian Springs almost immediately. A local grocer named Joe Jordan came to inspect the scene and later described the smell as offensive to the extreme, like that of a dead body. The resort's proprietor, Harrison Gill, documented meat still hanging from the fences the next morning and began collecting samples, preserving them in alcohol and glycerine to send off for identification, and in a detail that says as much about human nature as anything else in this story. Before any scientist ever examined a single sample, at least 2 local men tasted the meat themselves. They judged it to be mutton, or perhaps venison. A local hunter, more confident still, declared it was bear meat. Within a week, the story had reached the New York Times, under the headline, "Flesh Descending in a Shower." Scientific American picked it up soon after. What had happened on a quiet Kentucky farm was now a national sensation, and every scientist in the country wanted to know exactly what had fallen from that sky. So they started cutting it open under microscopes. And that's where this story gets even stranger. Samples were mailed to chemists and physicians in Kentucky, Ohio, and New York. 7 specimens were formally examined. And the results didn't agree with each other cleanly at all. 2 samples were identified as lung tissue, 3 as muscle, 2 as cartilage. Different tissue types, possibly different animals. All from the same few minutes, over the same small patch of Kentucky farmland. One prominent chemist, a man named Leopold Brandeis, examined a sample and confidently announced an answer. This wasn't meat at all, he claimed. It was nostoc, a jelly-like algae that swells up after rainfall and can resemble raw flesh. Scientific American ran his conclusion under the headline that the mystery was, at last, solved. There was just one problem. It hadn't rained. Other scientists, pathologists named A. Meade Edwards, J.W.S. Arnold, and Alan McLean Hamilton, quickly disputed Brandeis's claim. Under their microscopes, the tissue was unmistakably animal. Muscle fibers, cartilage, lung structure. Not algae, not plant matter, real flesh. Scientific American's confident solved story quietly fell apart. So if it wasn't algae, what was it and how did it get there? The theory most historians favor today came from a Louisville physician named Dr. L.D. Castenbein. His explanation: vultures. Both black and turkey vultures were, and still are, common across Kentucky. And when startled or threatened, vultures are known to vomit up whatever they've recently eaten as a defense mechanism to make a faster escape. Castenbein proposed that a large flock flying high overhead had been startled, and when one bird vomited, the rest of the flock followed, scattering a grim rain of half-digested carrion across the crouch farm below. It's a theory that fits much of the evidence. It explains why there were no bones in any sample. Vultures don't regurgitate bone. It explains the mixture of tissue types. It even explains the flattened, compressed shape of the pieces, consistent with material carried in a bird's crop. But here's what it doesn't explain. Nobody on the ground that day reported seeing a flock of vultures. Not one. To this day, the vulture theory remains the leading explanation, not a confirmed one. Other, stranger explanations followed the story for decades. A New York Times humor columnist joked that it was cosmic meat, fallen from some exploded planet. A joke, not a serious claim, though it's often misquoted today, as though people genuinely believed it. Mr. and Mrs. Crouch themselves came to believe it was a sign from God. And even now, some residents of Bath County suspect something far more earthbound, that the owners of the Olympian Springs Resort staged the entire event as a publicity stunt to draw attention to a hotel that sat, quite literally, in the middle of nowhere. What happened to the physical evidence is, in some ways, just as strange as the event itself. One single preserved sample survived, sealed in a small glass vial of alcohol, and then it simply vanished into storage for well over a century. It wasn't until 2004 that an art professor named Kurt Godet, cleaning out a university collection at Transylvania University, rediscovered it by accident. Godet arranged for modern DNA testing. Surely, after everything, after 130 years, after every advance in genetic science, we could finally know what this was. The sample was simply too old, too degraded, too contaminated. The test came back inconclusive. In 2024, that same sliver of unidentified tissue was finally returned to Bath County, where it now sits on permanent display at the Bath County History Museum. The community has even begun holding an annual festival to mark the anniversary, complete with a mystery meat chili cook-off. A century and a half later, we can say certain things with confidence. Real animal tissue fell from a clear Kentucky sky on March 3, 1876. Scientists in 3 states independently confirmed it. Newspapers across the country reported it as it happened, not as legend built long after the fact. But we still don't know, with certainty, what animal it came from. We still don't know exactly how it got there. And in an age when we can sequence a genome in an afternoon, that's a strange thing to admit. Perhaps that's the real lesson in this story. Not the mystery of the meat itself, but the reminder that certainty is more fragile than we like to believe. Even trusted institutions can declare a mystery solved and be wrong. Even the sharpest modern science can meet a question it simply cannot answer. Sometimes, the truest thing history can tell us is that some questions never quite close. If you